An evil son tries to attack his paralyzed father, but then an angry eagle shows up and does the unimaginable. On a quiet day, Donald was walking on the path behind his home when he noticed a bird writhing on the ground just beneath an oak tree. On moving closer, he saw it was an eagle with an injured wing that couldn't fly properly. The eagle tried repeatedly to flap its wings to take off, but could only raise its head. Donald pitied the bird, so he decided to help it. He bent down and put out his hands, turning his palms outward to show he wasn't a threat and to comfort the hurt bird. It wasn't clear how much the eagle understood, but it stopped moving and looked carefully at Donald with sharp eyes. When Donald came even closer, the eagle jerked backward but paused for a moment, giving Donald the chance to quickly catch it in his arms. Even though the eagle tried hard to get away, Donald held its legs tightly, minding its deadly talons so it couldn't escape or hurt him out of fear. He understood the bird was wary of humans, even though he had no intention of hurting the animal. When he got home, Donald carefully placed the eagle on a table by the window, hoping to keep it calm by letting it have a view of the outside world. Anticipating the eagle's restlessness, he still ensured the window was tightly closed to prevent it from hurting itself. To his surprise, the eagle complied, lying motionless on the table, making it easier for Donald to examine the injured wing. Upon closer inspection of the eagle's brown feathers, Donald observed the extent of the wound, noting the absence of several feathers and the depth of the injury. Donald cleaned the wound carefully and applied medicine to help it heal. He also gave it some food and watched as it ate. Donald kept the eagle in a slightly open cage by the window, never wanting it to think it was in captivity. As the eagle's wound healed, Donald grew closer to the magnificent bird. One day, when Donald came home, he found the eagle on a tree outside the house. It had fully healed and found its way out of the cage. Upon seeing Donald, the eagle started flying gracefully toward his house, its wings fully healed. Donald was very happy to see the eagle recovered and gave it a big meal. Donald tried to encourage the eagle to go back to the wild, but the bird seemed adamant about staying. It followed Donald everywhere he went. Each time he came back home, Donald found it funny but also a bit concerning, especially since he was running out of food for the bird. He joked, "You're strong again, but you still want to stay with me. I don't have any more meat to give you. Come on, go now." The eagle was having none of it. Even though it spent more time outside, it always came back to Donald. Donald paid no heed to the eagle's lingering presence and continued with his daily routines. Donald stopped giving food to the eagle, yet it persisted in returning day after day. Sometimes, after its hunting expeditions, the eagle occasionally brought back prey to Donald's home, which it had adopted as its makeshift nest. Donald eventually became comfortable with this routine, but he also had other parts of his life to think about. For one, his daughter was coming back home after being away for a year, and there was his son to worry about. When Donald lost his wife during the birth of their daughter, he was heartbroken. However, he had to pick himself up to raise their two kids despite being filled with sorrow. He missed having his wife around, but he still did his best to raise his children by himself. Donald had always felt very sorry for his daughter because she had never been cared for by her mother, so he tried to make up for it by giving her extra attention. This didn't mean he neglected his son, but sometimes, when he thought about Neo's behavior, Donald often wondered where he went wrong. Neo left home as soon as he turned 18, but bad news about him always managed to reach Donald. If he wasn't drinking, he was gambling, cheating, or womanizing. Each time he deigned to come home, Donald tried his best to talk to him, but the boy seemed to have walls for ears as he never listened nor changed. Donald often thought about this on his walks. One evening, while lost in dark thoughts about his son, Donald suddenly noticed a venomous snake approaching quietly and quickly. He was taken aback and was so shocked he could hardly move. Suddenly, an eagle flew down from the trees and grabbed the venomous snake with its sharp claws. He recognized it instantly. It was the eagle he had saved. There was a dramatic fight, and the snake was on the losing end, badly hurt and writhing on the ground by the time the eagle was done with it. However, the damage was done because the shock of seeing a snake had settled into Donald's body, and he soon collapsed in a heap. The eagle made raucous noises until one of Donald's neighbors appeared, and Donald was rushed to the hospital. At the hospital, the doctors declared Donald was paralyzed and would have to use a wheelchair. Donald was devastated by this news and could barely think of how to go forward. The only person he could call was his daughter, because he knew Neo would not find the situation an emergency. Nella was equally despaired when she heard the news but couldn't come immediately because she had urgent business at work. This left Donald lonely and sad. Nella promised to get him a helper in the meantime. The greatest of companions came from a place Donald least expected. The eagle became a steady presence during this time. Sometimes it simply sat outside the window and stared at the aging man. Donald came to appreciate the eagle's presence and for the first time was grateful it hadn't gone back into the wild. The helper Nella promised appeared the next day. His name was Frank. Frank was a nice man, and Donald took a liking to him. He helped Donald in and out of the wheelchair, took him outside in the evenings, and took care of all the household chores. Even though Frank was getting paid, Donald knew he could have been grumpy about it, so he was particularly grateful for him and his sunny disposition. However, the eagle didn't seem to like Frank at all. Whenever the helper came near, the eagle would make a lot of unwarranted noises and start flying in disorienting patterns. Donald tried all he could to figure out what was wrong and help the eagle calm down, but all his efforts proved futile. One evening, Frank had rolled Donald's wheelchair outside when he said he needed to quickly grab his scarf from inside, as it was a bit windy, and he was susceptible to colds. Donald sat outside enjoying the breeze when he heard a crash. Suddenly, the eagle came flying out of nowhere through the window and onto a tree in front of the house. It started circling the tree and making awful noises. Frank came outside and said he didn't know why the eagle was behaving that way, but that it had tripped the box of fine china above Donald's closet. Donald was visibly upset because his wife had given him those mugs that he loved so much. He didn't stop to think about what the bird might have been doing in his room before he yelled at it. "Never come back here again," he said to the bird as anger flashed in his eyes. The bird drew closer as though trying to check if the man was certain, but Donald shooed it away with his coat. The eagle flew away throughout the evening stroll that evening. Donald was filled with anger and a deep sense of loss. He started to think about why the eagle had done what it did, even though it had always shown unusual intelligence. He almost regretted sending it away, but whenever he remembered the broken mugs, he became filled with anger all over again. All the while, Frank was trying to comfort him and mentioned how he always felt the eagle wasn't a good bird. Donald couldn't take this, however, and asked that Frank maintain some silence as he needed some time to think. When both men got back that evening, they found the eagle on the tree outside. It didn't try to move closer, nor did it make any movement. It simply stayed on the tree. Some part of Donald was filled with a sense of relief to find the bird outside again. He didn't say anything, however, and didn't even let his gaze linger on the bird when he turned in for the night. Donald spent a large part of his night turning in his bed. Something was bugging him, but he didn't know what it was. The first time he truly felt the hurt of not being able to walk by himself, he was turning from side to side on the bed. He felt a piece of paper under his bedsheet. He felt around for it in the dark until he found it. It was a $100 note. That confused him because he hadn't spent any money himself in a while and usually just gave Frank his card to get whatever they needed around the house. The only cash he kept around the house was the one he was saving for his children in a box under his bed. He wondered how the money had gotten there. He also realized the money might belong to Frank, so he simply put it in his bedside drawer and went to sleep. A few weeks later, Nella arrived. Donald was so happy to see her. She was sad to see his state, but glad to see him again. She met Frank and introduced herself. "Hi, I'm Nella. You must be Frank." This shocked Donald, and he asked how come she didn't know his face. Wasn't she the one who had employed the helper? She mentioned that Neo had been the one to refer Frank, and that she had only paid for his services. She also noticed the eagle that seemed to be camped on the tree every evening. Donald explained how it had been there for him in ways he least expected. He then mentioned how it had broken his precious mugs, which were all he had left from his beloved wife. Nella put her hand on his and consoled him, saying that his wife would always be in his heart. Life was as good as it could have been with Nella around. She started taking him on evening strolls instead, and Frank no longer spent as much time. He, however, seemed to always linger near the house anyway. Donald liked the guy, but didn't see the reason for him to do that. He didn't mention it, however, seeing no need to stir up an issue where there wasn't one. Things were going well, and Donald was starting not to feel the impact of his paralysis as much. He had his daughter around, so he was happy most of the time. On one of their walks, Nella received a call. After she dropped the call, she delivered a piece of news to her father with a wince. "Neo says he's coming tomorrow," she said. It wasn't that Donald didn't want to see his son. He was only worried about what trouble he would cause this time, or what trouble he had already caused and was fleeing from. Neo arrived the next day with a rickety car and loud music. Even though he had come from another state, he barely had any load. This was the least of the weird things Neo could do, so Donald didn't complain. Surprisingly, Neo was respectful, and even tried to be cordial with his father. This was very unusual, but Donald, assuming his son had simply changed, was happy with the situation. Neo even accompanied him and Nella on their evening stroll. That day, they saw Frank on his way back from the grocery store, and he and Neo did an awkward wave that had Nella asking if they weren't friends. Neo said they were, but he just hadn't seen him in a long time. Donald was filled with joy to find his entire family going together, and went to sleep happy that night. However, around midnight, he woke up thirsty and was about to grab the glass beside his bed when he saw a strange light from underneath his door. He also heard whispers from the other side of the door. "You didn't get the money?" A voice that sounded suspiciously like Neo's asked. It was that eagle. "I don't know how it sensed, but it swooped in just when I was about to get it. I haven't had a chance since then. I have to pay off my debts," Neo responded in an annoyed tone. David gasped in shock as he realized what was happening. Frank and his son were colluding to steal money from him. He thought back to the incident with the fine china and the money he found on his bed. The eagle had been trying to protect him from Frank's theft. He heard footsteps coming closer to his door, so he pretended to be asleep. He left his door open, and the two men walked in. They started to quietly ransack his room for the money. Donald was so hurt that he couldn't take it anymore. "I can't believe you would do this, Neo," he said with hurt in his voice. Neo stopped in his tracks, but quickly started moving again. Donald started to scream, but Neo covered his mouth as his father struggled. Just when Neo was about to attack him for resisting, a loud noise stopped them all in their tracks as something flew through the open window. It was the eagle, and it started making loud noises that woke Nella up. She rushed to her father's room and was shocked to find Neo about to attack their father and Frank standing with stolen money in his hands. Even though she was hurt by this, Nella didn't waste time and quickly called the police. Donald, on the other hand, was grateful to the eagle for not only saving him once but twice. Even though he had shunned it, he asked Nella to put him in his wheelchair and push him towards the eagle. He stroked its feathers and said, "Thank you. Thank you for saving me."